I want to talk a bit about how the kind of multimedia stuff that I've worked on most of my life could be relevant to a library situation. Some of you might know our television show from PBS over the last 10 years, Between the Lions. I'm going to talk specifically about how it might be relevant to you, beyond the fact, of course, that it's set in a library to begin with. Some of you may know, but some of you may not, that the PLA and the ALA were very instrumental in our actually starting the show. I want to talk a little bit about Lions before I talk about how multimedia could work in the library, because it's all relevant. And I'll start with the idea that people said to us when we decided to do a program that teaches reading or fosters a love of reading. A lot of us had worked on Sesame Street, and we knew that you could put educators and creative people together. That was one of Sesame's great contributions. But people sort of said, use television to teach reading? That's an oxymoron, that's insane. And people say that to me to this day. And they probably say something similar about using video or using interactive games in a library to foster a love of books is counterintuitive also. But when you think about it, it's not. It's very, very hard to draw a picture of a verb. So we realized that obviously television could do a lot of things, like teach verbs, that are kind of hard to do in a book alone. We called together some of the top educators in the country. We asked them, what could we do with television that's pretty hard for teachers to do, or librarians to do, or to be done in a book? And they suggested a few things. One thing was verbal blending, the idea that you would put sounds together to make a word, or letters together to make a word, and that word would actually mean something, is kind of hard to do on a blackboard or in a book where you don't have any moving parts. We also realized through our advisors that there was a technique called slotting, which I think means people have been going to Las Vegas too much. But the idea is that you could change one letter at a time, the way a slot machine might have 3 things up and change one of them. And you could change one word to another and see how the sound of those letters changed along and changed the word. Or you could change a bunch of, you'd have a sentence and change one word at a time. And by slotting a new word into place, you could show how that word was affecting what you heard and what everything meant. If you use music, it can make something that has to be learned by rote and repeated over and over fun, because if you like the song, you'll eventually hear it a lot, learn the words, and maybe learn what the words stand for. We also can use text on screen in a TV show. We can make it look like a book, but of course it's read to you, and we can animate the pictures and highlight text as it's read. Where this becomes relevant is because of what's happened with technology, certainly since Sesame Street started, amazingly over 40 years ago now, but even our show is 10 years old. I think we foresaw what I'm about to talk about would be possible, but it really wasn't yet. And what's important here is that all the little things I showed you and all the things you remember from Sesame Street over the years are right on curriculum target. Everything you saw was designed to teach one specific thing that a school might want to teach, or that kids need to know as part of core curriculum standards, or just they need to know, period. Forget the standards. But, and they're all very short. If you wanted to teach the letter D, there are probably 30 different songs and other things that have been on Sesame Street over the years that do an incredibly funny and brilliant job of that. You might know the C is for cookie song the Cookie Monster sings. What better way to introduce the hard C sound to kids? But of course, until very recently, there was really no way to do that, either in a library or a classroom or anywhere else, unless you wanted to spend hundreds of hours finding that song. Before the DVD, it was even harder. But if the DVD is not chapterized, it doesn't help. And you might not have that in the classroom, and you might not know what DVD to look on. Imagine if it was on VHS. You would have to find the right show out of 4,000 Sesame Street shows, and then rewind to the right spot and hope that it stayed there. And you couldn't show anything else on that tape during that class unless it came right after it. So as a result, for 40 years, PBS and others, because Blue's Clues and Dora and other good shows are coming from other places now. But all that material has not been very useful because it's just too hard to find. If there was a teacher who was willing to do it now, they could probably find on YouTube a lot of these things, or some of them, and make their own classroom DVDs, but it would take hours and hours of work. They wouldn't be paid for it. Similarly, in the library, you might want to do something that we realized you might want to do. Something I didn't mention about our show is that there's a famous trade book that's used very much the way we use that Chick and Jane bit. We would take a book like Sylvester and the Magic Pebble or any number of other big hit books that you might think of and do that same treatment to them where you highlight text as read, use the original art but animate it, and then we will pull words out the way you saw us do and teach the letter sounds in those words, or we'll teach the vocabulary that's suggested by what's on the show. Well, again, nobody really thought of the fact that the kids who were watching those, if they had the book in their hand and could read it afterward, wouldn't that be cool? But obviously most of the kids, even the ones who might have the book, didn't have it handy. And a lot of our audience are kids who can't afford to have very many books and probably don't have the one we're reading, not a chance. But we said, why don't we do a library project where we have the shows and the books that go with them available in the same space at the same time, either to use in the library or borrow them. And couldn't we build activities around that? So working with family place libraries and libraries for the future to create a space where that could happen, we developed a way where you could look up a show on the computer and watch it right there on the computer, but that every game, book, or song that was available that taught the same things as that show would come up on the computer, and only those things would come up after you watched that show. But I think the most powerful part of all is something we call our digital dictionary. If you go into dictionary mode, then all these words will be defined for you, including the verbs and all the ones that are hard to define in a regular dictionary. This is a really interesting way to pull content together and relate it to literacy and relate it to the books that are in a library collection. In a classroom, it enables the teacher to show just what she wants to show that day. We think that there might be a future in libraries for sure, and so does AWE, which is why they invited me to be here.